one of the fascinating things about this summit, from day one, going over into today's sessions, has been how it's been a sort of build-up, right? We started looking at the challenges and some of the problems we are having in all of these sectors, and then now we then had a conversation about financing, and today we started with technology. We looked at the need for collaboration, and still one thing that has stood out is the place of young people and how we are the ones that will take this conversation forward into actions, not just now, but also in the future. It's therefore not surprising that the very next session we are having is focusing on how we can empower Africa's youth by driving innovation, overcoming the current challenges they face, and shaping the African Union agenda. A very important conversation, if I may say so myself, but you'll get to see when the panel starts the conversation. And I now have the pleasure of introducing the chair for this panel in the person of Dr. Robtel Pailey, who is a Liberian academic, activist, and author with over 20 years of experience across Africa, Europe, and North America. She has worked in policy, journalism, and academia, holding roles at Oxford, and SOAS, and also LSE. She has also consulted for organizations such as the UN and the African Development Bank. Dr. Robtel Pailey is a former speechwriter for Liberia's first female president. And even more than that, she was honored as Liberia's 2024 National Orator and has been named as one of the 25 Africans to watch out for by the Financial Times. She is currently, not surprising in any way, an associate professor here at the London School of Economics and Politics. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, join me to welcome on stage Dr. Robtel Pailey. Let's switch around. Okay.
I'll sit here. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Oh, I know you've just had lunch. I need a little bit more energy from you. I'm going to try that one more time. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Much better. Welcome back to the LSE's Africa Summit 2025. Thank you so much for that generous introduction. My name is Robtel Neajai Pailey, and I will be chairing this panel entitled Empowering Africa's Youth, Driving Innovation, Overcoming Challenges, and Shaping the AU Agenda. Our panel seeks to understand Africa's youth dividend challenges and opportunities from local, national, as well as multinational perspectives, and also devising solutions for creating sustainable, inclusive futures for Africa's youth and future generations. Now, you may be wondering how empowering Africa's youth might shift the continent's international alliances and turbocharge economic transformation. What kinds of youth-led innovations are taking the continent by storm, and how the African Union's 2063 agenda addresses youth and future generations across the continent and within its diasporas. I am very, very pleased to be joined by a rock star panel of speakers who have pioneered innovative solutions to youth development in Africa through technology, through entrepreneurship, through education, and much, much more. And to signal how truly Pan-African this conversation is, our guests have flown in to London from 3 different countries and regions in the continent. We'll start with Kehinde Ayeni, who is Executive Director of LEAP Africa, which focuses on youth leadership development. She has over 15 years experience in the nonprofit and corporate sectors, spanning operations, communications, branding, and marketing. Kehinde previously served as LEAP Africa's Chief Operations Officer. Welcome to Kehinde, who's joining us from Nigeria. Let's give her a round of applause. Kiru Muhoya is co-founder and CEO of Fingo Africa, a fully digital bank that enables youth to build wealth and transform their lives through sustainable financing. Kiru's goal is to address young people's challenges in accessing financial services and running their own businesses. Welcome, Kiru, who's joining us from Kenya. Let's give him a round of applause. And last but certainly not least, we have Vongai Neajai. Did I get that correct?
Perfect.
Sort of, kind of. She's founder and CEO for Alliance for Women and Girls, with over 20 years of diverse leadership experience across corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors. She is committed to leveling the playing field for women and girls. Vongai previously served as Chief Networks Officer and Head of Africa for Teach for All. Welcome, Vongai, who's joining us from Zimbabwe. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. Now, for social media users in the audience, the hashtag for today's panel is hashtag LSE Africa Summit 2025. The event is being recorded and will hopefully be made available, barring any technical glitches. We've got a series of provocations that I will ask our panel, with each round of provocations then followed by some interventions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will acknowledge you. My only request is that you make your question or comment very, very succinct, because we've only got an hour. Please let us know your name and affiliation before posing your question or comment. So we'll start with the first round of provocations. Now, what do you see as the greatest challenges to making Africa's youth a development dividend? Can we start with Kehinde, please?
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending the afternoon with us. Yesterday, the panels and all the sessions we sat through really spoke about the challenges in Africa, and to zoom into some of the problems with African youth development is not far from the things that they already shared. And just to speak from the why we exist, some of the challenges we found that is driving and fueling our work is governance, for example. Governance is a big issue for us in Africa, and it's not different for why Africa exists. We definitely are as good or as bad as those who govern us, and what we have found is data also shows that 1 in 4 people globally will pay a bribe for a service. And we also found that there's so many information suggesting that young people between 18 to 35 are likely to pay bribe also, more than those over 55. So while we talk about governance, a lack of goodwill, there is the people side of it as well that is fueling and driving some of the issues that we found limiting young people's progress, and why we cannot probably tap the full potential of young people. Another thing that we've also found in our line of work is education, and the fact that the kind of quality of education is leading to skills mismatch when they leave college, just because I'm trying to use more neutral terms. While 63% of young people in Africa have attained a secondary level education, that leaves 36% of them out of school. But beyond the fact that they're out of school, is also questioning the kind of requisite skills that they have. So we've also found in our line of work that there is a big mismatch within the reality of what is being taught in our secondary school and what exactly the job market needs. And because of that, there is a need for an intervention to ensure that we are managing successful transitions. Very, very clear. When you think about the out-of-school rates of young people, and you think about the quality of education, it's very, very impossible for them to transition successfully to a higher education. It's also very difficult for them to transition to another socioeconomic circumstance beyond what they are known for or known within their own economic realities. And when we think about this mismatch, it has a ripple effect on their contribution socioeconomically, in terms of what they can pursue, how they can aspire for more, or even how they can lead in future. When you think about another important way we think about the dividend side of the work is citizenship. We already talked about citizenship, but even close to that is the unemployment statistics, rather, I want to say statistics on unemployment. It's not news that young people in Africa largely are unemployed, but a third of our population are either unemployed, underemployed, or vulnerably employed. So this gives rise to why we are seeking for dignified jobs. So it's not enough for us to have a certain degree. It's even much more important for us to have dignified jobs. It's even much more important for us to have jobs that actually meet our talent, jobs that actually raise our human potential to do the best that we can at the jobs that we find, most beneficial for us in our community at large. So these are just a few reasons why we exist, and these are a few reasons why we feel we can't mine Africa's full potential if we have these staggering details staring at us in the face.
Thank you so much, Kehinde, for your intervention. Kero, any insights about what the greatest challenges are?
Yes. So first I'll echo governance, but from my perspective, it's in two parts, and both those parts relate to institutions. So in 2024, actually, two LSE alum won the Nobel Peace Prize for their piece on institutions and development. So Darren Akamoglu and James Robinson. And their thesis was that institutions matter the most in terms of development. And so what are the two institutions I'm talking about? Political institutions, number one, specifically in Africa. So political institutions, as you know, are not particularly, the best in Africa. And why is that? When we were, so I'm an entrepreneur, I started a digital bank in Kenya, and when we were starting out, it almost felt like everything's against you. And that's because, you go to register a business, it's hard. You want to, every kind of touch point with government services is just difficult, and a lot of young people can echo that. And why is that? It's because the political institutions that have been set up don't work. If they worked, then it would feed into the economic institutions, which right now we know as capitalism. And that would therefore work as well. And so, just to define what institutions are, it is kind of the rules of the game of society. It is what sets incentives and disincentives. And right now, the way the incentives are set is for these institutions to kind of work against entrepreneurs in the population. And a lot of the time, you'll hear young people across the continent saying, "Why does our government hate us? Why don't they want to work for us?" And we did a lot of math around this, and we're like, obviously, when I was younger, I was like, we can solve this problem, easy peasy. And so we did a lot of math around it, and governments, one, are the largest employers in most countries. So for example, in Kenya, it employs almost 2 million people, which is in a workforce of like 18 million people, right? So that's majority of the working people. And if those 2 million people are not working towards benefiting the population, what do? They're actually working against it. And it's not because they're bad, it's because the institutions that have been developed don't work. Why don't they work? Democracy. Does democracy work in Africa?
Is that a rhetorical question?
It's kinda. So my personal opinion is that it doesn't. Because here we are sat today talking about, I think every single time I've discussed governments, it has been in a negative light on the African continent, right? I mean, everyone has complaints about governments around the world, but, we look at specifically Africa, and it is specifically, ranked lowest in every indicator, right? And corruption doesn't just, it exists within institutions. So that's number one. So governance, but not just governance like people are corrupt. It exists in an institution, called political institutions called, democracy. Second is economic institutions. And that is capitalism specifically. So capitalists assume that we can create wealth by giving inputs in society. And we all have, some form of meritocratic right to, get jobs, build businesses, and ultimately create wealth. You don't have that in Africa, right? A lot of talented people, they can't find the capital. And we've had a lot of discussions today about capital. And from a venture capital perspective, I looked at what does it take to actually raise enough money to actually build large businesses in Africa. A lot of the capital comes from the West, and you need domestic capital, but ultimately it's just not enough. It's about $4 or $5 billion of venture capital coming to Africa. The need for investment is in the trillions of dollars. How do you, bridge that gap? And so ultimately we came to the understanding that maybe this capital system that we know doesn't work. You don't have enough housing. You don't have enough infrastructure. Virtually every single public service, healthcare, and even private companies, they don't have enough capital. And that's because it exists in a capitalist institution that, planted within the African context, just doesn't work. So those are my thoughts in terms of what needs to be done. Our institutions need to fundamentally change. What do they need to change to? I want to say something new, right? You're in a context of the youngest population in the world, in some of the newest countries in the world. We're not going to borrow something from the past. We can modify it, but ultimately it has to be something new, a new form of institution, a new form of capitalism, something that works for us.
Thank you very much, Kiru. Vongai, any thoughts about the greatest challenges to making Africa's youth a development dividend?
No, I think thank you so much to the moderator and the organizers of this conference. I think for me, before I give my response, I wanted to first react to the question itself. Because when I had the challenges about, in particular, the word development dividend, I think for me, I had to pause there because it then brings the youth as passive recipients. You know, for me, I'm sure as it is an academic institution, language is everything. So I really paused, so I just wanted to name that. But I think if I echo what my fellow panelists have said, and if I am to identify three of what I call or see as challenges, I think for me, number one is that the institutions are not ready for the young people. I hear you, Kiru, talk about we don't have this and that, but I think for me, I actually have got a different perspective when it comes to what Africa has. I think Africa has got what it needs. The challenge is that the institutions are not ready to see the youth that are coming up. In my space where I work, I've seen young people start schools underneath tree that are revolutionizing communities. I've seen young people set up tech companies with second-hand phones and not the resources that you have. So, but what's for me is missing is that the institutions are not ready. Right now, every place you go, people talk about in 2050, Africa's population is set to double. And then when you look at governments in Africa, I think there are less than 5 countries with young presidents. And sometimes even when young people are given seats at the table, they are not given the microphones. It's almost tokenism. So another challenge is that until and unless we move beyond tokenistic approach, we will never achieve what we need to achieve with young people. But what I'm so proud of young people these days is they don't wait for you to give them a seat at the table. They are creating their own, which I think is powerful, etc. I think the last thing that I would say in terms of the challenge, there's also a mindset piece, sometimes with both young people and the older generation. I think from the young people, some young people, it's almost like a deficit, what we do not have. But also from the older generation, we talk a lot about, let's have these young people, but if the truth is to be told, we are the ones that are standing in the way from these young people. We're closing that very same door we're trying to open. So I think for me, that's one of the other biggest challenges. I think I say it here, until we look clearly in the mirror and see who is causing the problem, I don't think we'll ever achieve what we need to achieve in this space. But Africa, I still say it has got everything that it needs.
That's a really great way to end that round of provocations. Africa has everything that it needs. I think you're absolutely right. So then let's talk about those solutions, right? So what I want to find out from the panelists is what innovative solutions have you pioneered that address the challenges you've identified? And for the sake of time, maybe give us 1 or 2 examples of these innovative solutions that you've pioneered. Let's start with Kiru now.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, after I graduated university, I found myself back in Kenya and I was trying to be an entrepreneur. I entered a bank and I was extremely frustrated getting an account. So, paperwork, addresses, different signatories, and I felt like that was because I looked young and I looked like I didn't have money. I didn't have money and I wasn't, which I wasn't. But nonetheless, a lot of people, were like that. Should they be turned away? No. So I kind of walked out of that and I was like, I'll just build a bank. It's going to be a bank for Africa's youth. Median age is 19. Who else is going to bank us except ourselves? And that started a long, roller coaster of ultimately building what became Africa's first youth digital bank. We raised about $5 million from global investors. We set up shop, got our licenses, got different bank partners, and we launched and became one of the fastest growing digital banks in East Africa. Now we have over 300,000 accounts, and continue to build this, what I want to be a youthful banking institution, where we service customers fully digitally. They no longer have to experience any form of discrimination. We lower the prices, and we give them tools to ultimately create wealth.
Fantastic. Let's give Carol a hand. I mean, that's incredible. Again, repeating what Vangai said, Africa has all that it needs to create the transformation that we all desire. So Vangai, maybe you can chime in terms of your innovative solutions.
Yes, I said, what a difficult challenge to follow Kiru, because I think from the work that I do, for me, if I say innovation we're not running programs at the Alliance for Women and Girls, but we're building power. And I'll say it again, we are building power. And what we're doing as well is, when people think about innovation, sometimes it's about what are we building, but for us, we are amplifying the voices that already exist. Because when you talk and think about the Silicon Valley and the change that people advocate for, it's very rare that people actually sit and say, hey, who is doing what? Like in our line of work, we've seen mothers stop gender-based violence in their communities. We've seen elders, women, working with younger girls to tell them, you are enough, you can go to school. So for us, when we talk about innovation, is how do we amplify their voices and make sure they continue to do the amazing and incredible work that they are doing. That's what we call innovation. Another thing that I think, one more thing that I think, when I think of the line of work, is what we do. We talk a lot about culture and posture. I was saying to someone earlier on, what we're doing is shifting the development landscape, because at the moment, any conversation you go to, everybody's talking about Trump, America, everything else, right? And I actually wrote a very provocative article recently that, and apologies in advance, anyone who's listening, is that sometimes Trump is what Africa needs right now.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think so many times we've been given handouts in so many ways, but if you look at a few African countries who have just shifted this development landscape, innovatively amplify the voices that people have already. For me, that's what we call innovation. Because most of the things we're importing from the West. If you think about this bank, if you think about Kenya, the biggest money company is in Kenya. Nigeria, there are so many things that are happening on the continent that are homegrown. So I think for me, that's innovation. We should clap hands for ourselves as Africans.
So there's an Indian author, activist extraordinaire by the name of Arundhati Roy. You might be familiar with her. And she says this famous quote that there's no such thing as the voiceless. There's only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. And I think that speaks to what you were saying about amplifying voices that are already there. It's just a matter of giving them space to be heard. So Kehinde, can you tell us about your innovative solutions?
Yes, so our organization is really focused on human capacity development, economic development, nation building, and that allows us to work in a range of programming, from education, employability, entrepreneurship, active citizenship, and talking about the resilience of young people. So when you think about innovation, it's hard for me to choose just two things to say about the kind of work we've done. Unlike Kiru, who has established their own organization for maybe 3-4 years, we've been running for 23 years, almost 23 years, and that means that we have a lot of response to some of the challenges we've seen in Africa in the past, current, and even in the future, where we are predicting some of the issues that would emanate not from our growing population alone, but what we even need right now. So it's true, to buttress what he said, that Africa has got what it needs. We are surrounded by innovators. For example, our Social Innovators Program is one particular program that we are very proud of. We've been running that program for 11 years now, but even before it became that, it was, first of all, just a mere award-given change makers identifying platform. And then we saw the need for them to become more institutionalized. And now it's become an accelerator program where we are finding African innovators who have started their businesses, but they are peculiar because they are not as large or as big as Kiru's. They've started their venture. They're trying to make a headway in their enterprises. It's solving real life issues in rural communities, even in urban cities. and their projects or initiatives really look like the range of the 17 goals. What we do with them is to find them and help them to be sustainable, scalable, and potentially profitable, where they're able to attract more investment or investors into their projects, into their enterprises. In the 1 year that they meet us, they are able to diversify their portfolio from one program, initiative, idea, product to even much more. And we've seen in the last 11 years how they've moved from one country or community into even more countries outside Nigeria. So whilst Leap Africa is Nigerian-based, we are based there in Nigeria, we implement projects across Africa, and that allows us to reach a large number of Africans per time for every of the programs that we are implementing. In response to the challenges that they've identified, along with the ones I said, we definitely have begun to pioneer some specific programs in that sense. Another program I'll speak of would be the Nigerian Youth Futures Fund. Now, that is a program we are implementing on behalf of some development partners. But it's good to mention because it asks a big question on democracy. And if we are challenging democracy by our current public sector leaders, citizenship, there's got to be a response. And that project right now is responding to raising a new crop of citizens, a new crop of activists, a new crop of civic society leaders, a new crop of civic tech space. So whilst it's doing the programming capacity building of individuals and organizations, it's actually disbursing funds to go to places and into the pockets of individuals and organizations that these big funders cannot get to, or because of the restrictions with setting up their enterprises or businesses appropriately, they can access that funding. So we become a fund of fund in a way, in order for us to disburse or sub-grant a huge chunk of money annually through that project to a lot of individuals and communities. And there's also the policy side of it. You cannot seek for democracy or good governance in isolation or with programming. There's a tech side of it where a chunk of the grantees are also pioneering innovative tools to track democracy, sustain democracy, and institute rights, or whatever ways in which they see fit in terms of how they are instituted. But there's the policy actors as well, who the fund is mobilizing to go into parliament, is allowing them to think about public service in a new way, is allowing them to agitate on the things that really concern young people. So beyond getting on the table, speaking on the table, being in the room, is the actual work that needs to be done. And beyond that is also the future, where we are predicting the future and saying, what does Nigeria look like by 2050? And this is a question. There are many visioning exercises that have happened all over Nigeria. But this is peculiar because this is the work of young people who have sat down, about 130 Nigerians who have come together and said, plausible scenarios, and this is the most plausible scenario for you to go with. If you're going to go with this particular situation or scenario to be achieved, you've got to hit these indicators. So there's this big, massive report that we've also, that's come out of this project, for example, that we've socialized with all the public sector leaders at national level, grassroots level, and even, did I say national level? Subnational level. Very important to engage across all these levels because domestication is very important. You find that when you go into the local government, the agenda is very different from what's happening at the national level. The governor's priorities for the state is different from the agenda of the national level. So mobilizing with the ministries of youth and all the other parastatals that are working and responsible for young people is really the work that we are doing. But the project is not the only reason that we are mobilizing this. We're working in the schools as well, the schools, when I speak about the schools, the undergraduate. Now these are people who have come of age to vote. They are not trusting the governance structure that we have enough for them to go out and vote. And if you think about the last election we've had, and now that we're preparing for another round of elections, the work that we are doing right now within that project and another project that we've got is to begin to sensitize young people around the power of their vote, about speaking truth to power, about accountability. And that is a lot when you really want to push the agenda to create the right system, structures, and institutions that we're speaking about. So I'm just going to pause there since you said to talk about only two things. So.
Great. Let's give them a round of applause. I think those solutions are definitely really intriguing. Now, I feel like I'm in moderator's heaven because precisely what's happened is that there's a generative conversation amongst the panelists, that you're already in conversation with one another. But I want to bring the audience into the conversation so that you're not just being talked at for the next 30 minutes or so. Is there anyone in the audience who has an intervention, a question, or a comment? I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I'm going to recognize you. I see your hand up. I ask that you identify yourself, tell us who you are, and then try to make your comment or question very, very succinct so that we can have some responses from the panelists. Thank you. Please, go ahead. Do we have a mic? There's a roving mic coming, so if you just wait a second. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Sheldon Onosonia. I work as a lawyer at Helios Towers. They own and operate towers in telecommunications in Africa. My question is for Kiru specifically, and it's about the dichotomy between financial inclusion and financial extraction. Like a lot of people talk about, innovative tools. For example, M-Pesa is like the darling of Africa, but actually there's a lot of extraction that goes on when a tech company amasses the critical mass to basically charge whatever fees it wants. So my curiosity is around that dichotomy of financial inclusion that ticks a lot of ESG boxes, but in reality may leave a lot of Africans poorer in the long run.
Great question. Can I have maybe one more intervention from the audience? Okay, I see a hand back there. If you can make it succinct. Tell us who you are and then make your question or comment succinct.
My name is Toby. I'm a student at LSE. My question, I don't know if it's a question.
It can be a comment, that's fine too.
Yeah, okay, so what I've been thinking about a lot is about how many of the initiatives that young people contribute to the world are very valuable and important, but they only bring about change in the margins. And we don't get the scale of there's so much value in it, but we don't get, and I always think that maybe politics might be the way for us to get power to create the kind of change that I want to see. So I was wondering if you have maybe some thoughts on that. I think Kehinde mentioned some things about training programs for getting young people involved in politics, either by voting or taking political power. But I'm curious, in areas of policy, the knowledge that you have, I just feel change in margins is valuable, but change at scale is what we really need.
Yeah, it's a really, really good comment. And I think my panelists will probably want to respond to that. So I think, Kira, you had a question around inclusion versus extraction, really intriguing question. And then anyone can comment in terms of response to this idea of scaling up. So change at the margins, fantastic, but what about transformative change at the national, subnational, even global level? So Kira, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So I agree. There's a difference between financial inclusion and actually positive impact. I'll talk about M-Pesa. M-Pesa, was developed 15 years ago, and it was developed as a wallet. Now it is kind of celebrated everywhere except by Kenyans, to be honest. You talk to the average Kenyan, ask them about M-Pesa. This is what I always say. I'm ask them about M-Pesa, and they'll tell you they actually don't like it. It's the most expensive way to send money in the world today. It's amongst the most expensive ways to send money in the world today. And this is typically what happens with large kind of innovations, is that they end up becoming monopolistic and something called rent seeking, right? And rent seeking is kind of an economic practice where there's certain market distortions. For example, they will not let anyone else get a license so that there's competition, or they will kind of create barriers to entry and kind of create a monopoly. So that's typically what happens. And M-Pesa moves about 50% of Kenya's GDP, to give you the scale of it, right? So we don't like M-Pesa. And talk to Kenyans. This is not just me, right? So what does actual financial inclusion mean? So for us, our mission is to create wealth. Right? So we don't want to make money in ways that you shouldn't make money. For example, a very simple way is a peer-to-peer transaction. On M-Pesa, it costs between 2 to 5%. So if you want to send money to your friends and family, that's a charge. With Fingo, it's free. We could make, it 1% or whatever, but in our minds, our mission is just to create wealth. And this happens across a variety of different industries, not just telecoms. You'll see rent seeking in housing. We'll see rent seeking in automotive industries. Like, did you know that East Africa and a lot of markets have the most expensive cars among anywhere in the world, just because of kind of the per capita income versus the taxes they pay. So there's a lot of rent seeking that is masked as innovation, but actually it's not. It's just market manipulations.
So what are you doing differently, Keru?
Well, one, we're trying to fight the monopolies. Most times we're losing, but sometimes we win. I think this changes in the long run. So the short-term game is that everyone comes into African markets with kind of unique products and they make a lot of money. But the long-run game is that if fair competition is allowed, you cannot make that amount of money. Like, it's just it's kind of unethical to some degree, right? Like, for example, one thing I always point out and now that I've learned enough about banks, is that treasury bonds in Africa pay 15 to 20%, right? So meaning that banks, when they get your money, they put it in government bonds and they pay a really high interest, and then they disincentivize them from lending to mortgages and businesses, and that's another market distortion, right? Where you have such an unfair amount of capital being taken into specifically I want to say not the most productive use, because ultimately the governments don't spend them the way we want, and so there's a lot of market manipulation. So our thesis is we want to, whatever helps young people create wealth is what we'll do. If that means reducing transaction fees where we don't make that rent-seeking margin, we do that. And a lot of times that is disruptive and we get in trouble, but we got to do it.
Fantastic. Okay, so scale. Let's start with Hongai and then we'll move to Kehinde.
Sure.
So thank you. I thought that was a good question. And I think when I heard you speak, you were talking about young people are working in the margins. I think from where I sit, because currently the organization I run, we operate in 23 countries across the continent. And I'm actually realizing that the young people are not running on the edges, and there are 4 things that I've seen really blow things up. One, I think when I've seen young people organize and not isolating, like really, I think for me there's power when you grow your networks. I've seen so many young people come together. I think we've seen countries, even in Kenya, where the country came to a standstill because of young people. Of course, that seems like an extreme version, but when young people come together, I've seen that really shifting the margin. I've also seen young people really redesign their own table, if I use the language I used before. And this is a fantastic example of, because of his experience of not being able to secure funds in the way he did, he said, rather than just try to comply, how about trying to do something different? So I think that's another one. So 2 very brief last points that I've written here is about, I said, create what we call citizen labs in the margins. By that, we've seen, like recently I was in one of the spaces in Uganda, and in one of the most rural, remote places you can ever think about. But young people between 16 and 23, what they have done is they came together and they started like asking themselves, what are some of the issues our village and our communities are facing? And they established what they call labs, where they come in, they start coming up with ideas and prototype to solve from agricultural issues to social issues and everything in between. And the amount of ripple effect that's causing, it's fantastic. And someone says, when we think about change, sometimes we think about the tsunamis of this world, but I think there's a mindset shift in young people when they think, what are the small acts and the ripple that we want to do now that will lead to collective change? Because when you believe that every single act you do is going to lead to something bigger and bolder and much more powerful, I think it puts some momentum in what you're trying to do. I think that's what I could say, but fantastic, well done, good question.
Yes, thank you. Change at scale, good question, thank you for that. So imagine what one organization can do. 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, Leap Africa could only mobilize a few thousands of young people towards, good governance or citizenship programs. Now, with some of the projects that we have, particularly the last one I spoke of, imagine a $6 million project, and half of that fund is going towards grassroots mobilization. Imagine what that can do, where several civil organizations are really orchestrating, agitating, and really doing so much to ensure that we have space not only for young people, but a country indeed, and talking about nation building. So there's a lot of work that is being done by Leap Africa to ensure that we are going at every problem we've identified at scale. 2004 to 2008, when we had our youth leadership program, for example, we probably trained maybe roughly 3,000 people in that program in 4 years. Now, what we've done is to be able to reach about maybe 20,000 undergraduates in 3 years. That is a big leap from what we've done in the past and where we are now. So scale is very important when we think about changing the structure of situation in Africa and changing the structure of situations in our current realities in every country that we found ourselves. We found not only do we work in Nigeria, but problems are similar in African countries. Therefore, we don't just open up our programs to Nigerians alone. We are talking about 10,000 people enrolled in our Leadership Accelerator program for women, for example, just to ensure that we are looking at that gender focal lens to see more women in leadership, not only in business, but in private sector, in public sector as well. So there's a big change that's happening there. Another example of scale for us is our community development. So for the number of undergraduates who are going through our program, say 15,000 in the last 3 years, they are expected to go into their communities, identify a change, a problem rather, and then come up with a solution. They are given micro grants in there, and then they continue on to see what they can do to see the change. There's a change in their own community. Now that's scale. So you're seeing movement from passive, not just passive, like she said, clueless young people to motivated young people who now want to do something, and they carry on that spirit beyond the 1 year or 2 years that we have that interface with them into more sustainable programs. The last thing in terms of scale is our program that is on the day of service. Our youth day of service is more than a day of service. Now we are plugged into promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we think about change at scale, we also need to be looking at all the other metrics that development countries are using as indicators, and the Sustainable Development is one of that we are using. So our youth day of service is mobilizing thousands of volunteers across the continent, about 44 countries in which our work is reaching in that project alone, motivating them to take an action to contribute and promote the attainment of the development goals by 2030. And so there's a lot that's being done at scale, whether to mobilize change or whether to see change fast-tracked by young people who are activated, catalyzed.
Great, thank you so much for those prompts and insights. So there's a really famous, I see your hand up, don't worry, I'm coming for the last round of provocations and I'll acknowledge you at the top. So there's a really famous Kenyan philosopher, late Kenyan philosopher by the name of John Beatty, and he talks about this idea of African metaphysics being really a continuum of the living, the dead, and the unborn. And I think one of the things that's happening with this African Union Agenda 2063 is it's thinking about the unborn, right? So it prioritizes youth empowerment and future generations. So what I want to hear from you all is, why do we need to be concerned about Africa's unborn, the future generation to come? Sorry, Bongai.
Yes. I think for me we should care, first of all, because history is watching. Whatever actions we do today, I think I can imagine 5-6 centuries from now, we are the ancestors of the unborn children. So whatever decision we make today, they won't only need to leave them, the consequences, but they need to almost retell what did those who went before us did, right? So I think for me it's one of the things that I think we should really be concerned about. Why? So right now in this global economy where decisions left, right, and center, what happens in this country affects what happens in another. I think it's really up to us. I was chatting with someone just before this panel, and they were talking about how they feel so nervous and anxious to make some very provocative decisions because of what's going on. I saw myself really pondering around, oh my gosh, if my name is to come up in 10, 15, 20 years, with grandchildren, children that I'll never meet, would they be proud to say Vongai was one of the people who stood for what was right, or Vongai was one of the people that she chose comfort more than anything else? And one of the things that I think makes me feel much more sad, and I'm thinking, gosh, we should really be concerned, is that even some of like the way we're living now, our generation, it was a consequence of what happened before us. So in summary, we should be concerned big time, because any decision we're making right now has got huge implications. So one of the things we do at the Alliance for Women and Girls is that we realize that, in particular, for example, in the development space, a lot of how we measure success, how we talk about SDGs was really shipwrecked in such a way that it's not really relevant to our context and for our context. So one of the things that we always do is that how do we shift and challenge? So right now we've got a portal with thousands of resources that are Afrocentric. Is that when we talk about decolonizing aid, when we talk about education in our continent, what does it mean for us and by who? So I think because of all those different layers, we've really come up with what's called, it's an INE model, which I'll kind of say in short, which really looks at when we think about development and progress, what does it mean for me in my context? So just to give you one example, one of the communities where we work in, like young girls, I think if those people who are from Kenya know about the Maasai communities, is that when you turn 8 as a girl child, you have to be sexually initiated by sleeping with a man, because when you sleep with that man, if you get, the rule is that you can't get pregnant. If you get pregnant, if any one of you Googles beading, you find it. It has to be manually aborted. So when you talk about success impact measurements in that community, one child's life being saved is massive and impactful. But sometimes when you come and talk to donors where money is coming from, they think your numbers are not working. So again, for us, we should be concerned about future generations, because anything we endorse now, anything we allow now has got huge ripple effects. So that's all I can say.
Thank you, Wangai. Kehinde?
Wow. I wasn't expecting that. Why should we be concerned? We should be concerned if we want to have a place to call home. Even though the best of us are living in developed countries because of why and how easy it is to live here, we need a place that is truly ours as Africans. Africans in diaspora, I believe, desire to want to come home, spend time with families, but the conditions in which they would be and live in that place is really not good enough. And so for us to really think about posterity, we've got to start taking those actions now. So the impact, the outcomes of the project, work, and policy that we are pushing now really leads up to that point in time where 20 years from now, 50 years from now, maybe we would be able to achieve that. When I landed in London some days ago, I actually met a young man who was comparing notes with me about Mumbai and Lagos, and we're talking about maybe in our lifetime we may not see our countries and our cities rise out of poverty. Maybe in our lifetime we may not see our cities and countries really live up to the potential of a developed market. Even though we've been touted as developing, we have not truly developed even after this amount of time. And there are many reasons he said maybe we would not. And he's thinking from the point of all the endemic issues that we've pointed to today. And so if we really want to change that narrative, if we really want our realities of the future to be different, then we have to take a step now. And the best of us have to also come back into public sector. It's difficult. We are all doing our things on the sidelines, like we've tried to talk about now. But we have to be at the face of it. We cannot be on the sidelines. We've got to take a stand. We've got to be in front of it. We've got to protect our heritage in that sense. So there's a lot that we need to do. We should be very worried as we push for different agendas on the table.
Thank you. Gero?
I think if we don't, it's just going to be a nightmare. So Agenda 2063, in 2063 I'll be like 64, 65 years old. There'll be about 3 billion Africans. If the rate of poverty continues the way it is today, then everything's going to be so much worse. We're not going to have a place to call home. The amount of boats and migrants dying across the Mediterranean is going to increase. The amount of malnourished children, the amount of uneducated children, the amount of kind of corruption, like every indicator is just going to get worse, right? And so that's kind of my motivator. Things will not get better unless we intervene. I also have a problem with the, why 2063, right? I've never understood. I mean, it's an excellent and incredible plan. I've just never understood why 2063, and this is, I think, one thing that sometimes when we make plans as Africans, we kind of aren't as ambitious as we should be. We know that across the last 100 years, we've seen countries, pull their populations out of poverty in decades, from China to even the Nordics, to even the Gulf states. We've seen that happen across, 20, 30 years. Today we have more technology than they did, yet we're still planning, a lot longer than we should. So I think we need to drastically reduce that time. We need to approach it as if this is it's kind of a wartime effort, right? And another thing that needs to happen is the amount of resources allocated. So, we look at the amount of money that is needed to execute large plans. It is more money than our entire African GDP, right? So African GDP is about 3% of global GDP. To rebuild Africa the way we want, which is assuming a per capita income equivalent to the West, you are going to need trillions and trillions of dollars, right? And just to put that into perspective, I was doing some rough math. If you had a comparable per capita income in Africa as the West in 2063, that would be about $200 trillion of economy, right? That's the biggest economy in the world. To get there, you need systems that frankly don't exist today. And the way we think about resource allocation, it's not actually an investment. It's almost like a financial revolution where we need to be able to give ourselves access to that type of capital. And the only comparable movement I saw like that was kind of post-World War II Europe, where they had the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan effectively involved the USA and allies injecting over $5 trillion into European economy. And that helped stimulate demand industries and effectively led to a reconstruction over decades that now a lot of ordinary people in Europe enjoy. An effort like that is needed. Speed is needed. I think we can do it in 10 years. I don't want to be like, my late 60s enjoying Africa. I would love to enjoy it much sooner. And I think it is possible.
Okay, so it sounds as if Kiru's just dropped down the gauntlet to the African Union and said, you're not being ambitious enough. But I think that's a really, really good challenge, right?
Tell them to come to me.
Yeah. So let's open it up. We've got about 10, 12 minutes-ish. Let's see if I realize that I concentrated on this side of the room in the last round of provocation. So I'm going to look to see if there are any people on this side who have anything to say. I want to start with you on the top. Yes?
Okay. I am Özgür. I study development management here at the LSE. Before coming to here, I worked in blockchain and fintech.
Do you mind speaking louder?
Speak up.
Okay, now it's good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, I think no institution in the world was ready to fine-tune itself, transform itself to keep up with the pace of innovation. So I know many startups with this dramatic disruptive power, which outpaces the capacity of institutions to regulate these sectors in the short term, which brings them bargaining power. So considering the African context, what do you think about the level of disruptiveness and the role of startups to fine-tune, build, and shape the institutions?
Okay, disruptive startups, great. Let's see. Can you run down quickly? There's someone down here. If you can speak louder while you wait for the mic to come. Oh, there's a mic right there. Sorry, apologies, I didn't see. Yeah, identify yourself and make your intervention very, very, very succinct.
Yeah, I'm Kenneth Nimo, and I'm PhD with King's College London. I examine creative economies in development. My intervention, mine will actually be just a contribution. Perhaps I could also, in a way, answer the question that just came. I explore fashion specifically, and according to UNESCO and the EFDB, fashion in the textile economy is about over $31 billion. And here you see again the old challenges of institutional voids, both political infrastructure and also civic. And you see startups in terms of young, youth-led and enterprise-driven innovation and solutions basically that are addressing these challenges within the fashion industry. Examples include this Ivory Coast-based company called Anka that basically creates a platform access to market for fashion designers on the continent. There's also Industry Africa that is also opening access, basically making it easy for consumers in the global north to access luxury fashion on the continent. So just a contribution.
No, I appreciate
Looking
that.
at the positive side of things, like one guy said.
Yeah, and we don't talk enough about creative industries. So I said I was going to focus on this side. Anyone else on this side of the room who has an intervention? So we'll go, okay, since you have the mic, if you can make it very succinct, we'll then come to you, and then oh gosh. We'll end with you in the back if that's all right. Now, the speakers will be available after the session, so you're more than welcome to come and bombard them with more questions. Yeah? Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll read my question so I'll be very succinct. My name is Kehinde. I work with Liberian Africa. So I'll read. The institutions are not ready for innovation, like Vongai said. Institutions are not ready for innovation that young people have to offer. And I've seen that over the years to scale, most young people migrate out of Nigeria or out of Africa for scale and visibility. So my question would be, are forces from the global north poaching the global south in a post-colonial attempt? That's number one. Can we build
one question, my man. One question. No. Let's. Nice try. Yes, you.
Hello. So my name is Angela, and I'm a student at Ford College, which is a partner institution of the LSE. And I'm actually Kenyan, and I'm half Maasai, as the community that you mentioned. And a few years back, my friends and a few family members founded a mini project where we went into the Maasai communities and we distributed sanitary towels to these communities. And having interacted with them, you find that they have a lot of cultural beliefs that are really hard to eradicate. So for example, what you talked about in terms of 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and the kids getting mutilated and stuff, it's really hard to take that out of the community and change their mindset. So what do you think could be done within these communities to shift their mindsets from that cultural, that toxic cultural thinking into a more modern way of living?
Thank you, and we'll end with the person all the way in the back. So just to remind you all, the questions we've had so far about disruptive startups, north-south imbalances, and then mindset change, and we'll end with this last intervention.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Yewande. I'm a student here at LSE. Mine is a contribution, mainly. I'm just thinking about how do we ensure we center. So sometimes when we come for conversations like this, I feel like we do not really focus on really hard to reach young people. So we have a large percentage of Africa's youth in rural areas. We have refugees who are stuck in a state of liminality. They're just there. You have youth with disabilities, for example. So again, just to, seed that thought. When we talk about young people, how do we bring these kinds of people back into the conversation, knowing that they make up a significant portion of Africa's population?
Right. And then the last one is, how do we address youth on the margins? So I'm going to open it up for any of you to intervene, and you can respond to any of the questions that really speak to you. Yeah? So maybe just go in this order: Vongai, Kiru, and then Kehinde. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to put you on the spot. Okay, let me open it up. Never mind.
Yes.
I can give it a crack.
You want to start? Okay.
Yeah.
And if you could make your interventions very brief, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just 2 comments. One is on the disruptive startups affecting institutions. I think institutions in general are very hard to change. We've seen that across time. It's very difficult for example, us in financial services to break through and actually change how things are done, especially startups with small resources. It pains me to say this, but the only way is to partner with these institutions. It's old institutions, and then progressively change from within. So there's really, instances where institutions have been toppled and others have just come up. It's been a slow, gradual change where, ideas and, startups, they don't, disruption is like a very kind of, punchy word, but it's just progressive, slow, painful change. And you need a consistent amount of effort and dedication to do that. So there's no quick way to do that. And then just a quick comment on the kind of neo-colonial aspect. I think that we are the ones that internalize a lot of Western ideas and cultures, and we use that to kind of build the same institutions that we kind of use. So from political to economic to even technology, and it is not a bad thing all the time, but when it comes to how we kind of look at the future, I don't think it is the like-for-like model. It is something new that emerges from that ultimately works. We are influenced. The influence is good to a large degree, but to a larger degree, there's influences from the East and the West and etc. And I think it's our job to kind of pick and choose what we like, as opposed to kind of consistently saying that it's someone else's fault.
Yeah, and to also remember that we have a whole continent of 54 countries that we can also look to for solutions, as we've already mapped out here. So, Bongai, I'm looking at you. Should I? Okay, thank you, Kehinde. Go ahead.
I'm ready to go. So, on the question of disruption, yes, youth-led enterprises are doing that already. They are already disrupting the landscape, and it's going to take a while before we can see the institutions begin to change. But the fact that they exist, the fact that they are pushing their own agenda or priorities, it's really doing something. Another way they are able to change institution, I put it down here as global awareness to the issues, global awareness and popularizing the subject matter in which they are already pushing their own enterprise. You would find, for example, that the kind of innovators we're speaking of are upcycling, recycling, and doing things that are very innovative, very different. And when you call the attention of the global community into that, then there is going to be someone asking for a change that's going to benefit a larger ecosystem of people. Another thing is also the research and development side of it. Yesterday they talked about research and commercialization. What these youth-led enterprises are doing is already pushing that envelope to a large degree. And so it's happening. It's going to take a while to see it, but it's there. But we just need to do much more. The question, the comment that you made, Yewande, on the youth on the margins, this is a big effort for us at Leap Africa, for example. We are consistently trying to see how to bring more people, reduce the gap between those who are aware, those who are aware, those who are trained, those who not have access. It's a big thing we are piloting within the organization. For every program we have, we are looking for those who are marginalized, those who are outside of the community. So IDPs is something that we are looking into for the first time. We are going away from just looking at the disaggregation of women to men. We are looking at those who are, widows, albinism, and all sort of differently enabled people are also coming into our programs now. So it's not enough to say we have PWDs, but we are also looking at a wider spectrum. But we can still do much more, but there's a lot of efforts going on to see that we are including more voices, more people that are very representative of the true African, the true persona of young people that we are trying to address.
Fantastic, Kehinde.
Yeah.
Bongai, you have the last word.
Yes, so very quickly, I want to speak to my sister's point here around people don't want to change, they want to stick to those cultures. I always say, remember one of the things that I talked about, I said for us, innovation is power and amplifying the voices of those that are already in the communities. So if you come from the outside, even if you're originally from there, people will resist you, like the system will resist you. So for me, it's about how do we ensure that people are already there in the system, like in the communities, the grassroots leaders are given their voice to amplify enough to challenge what we think is harmful practices. I'm sure as this room is full of academics, we know culture is not static. It's always shifting and changing. So sometimes when people are resisting, it's another way of them telling you that We don't feel like we can trust you. We don't feel like you are hearing us, and we feel like you're looking down on us. So I always say, for any interventions that people want to do, ask yourself, what place are you operating from? So that's one. I think there was someone here who talked about disruption. I think it's my brother up there, talking about disruption around, are we moving at the right pace? Maybe I misinterpreted the question. And then for me, I always think, but whose definition is disruption, right? At the moment, when people talk about disruptive investments, they are usually focusing on what my brother brings here around tech, etc.
Yeah.
But I am such an advocate of social disruptors, like those women and girls that are doing fantastic work, but it's never called a disruptor because it doesn't fit in someone's definition. So I think it's high time as Africans we start asking ourselves, whose narrative, who is the author of what we're trying to do, and shift from that.
That's a fantastic way to end. Okay, so yes, let's give them a round of applause. It has been such a pleasure engaging in conversation with Kehinde Ayeni, Kiru Muhoya, and Vongai Nyahunzvi today. Thank you so much, Kehinde, Kiru, and Vongai, for finding time in your very, very busy schedules to join us today. I'd also like to publicly acknowledge and thank LSE Africa Summit 2025 team member Rutendo Mwamba. Where are you? Raise your hand so that we can all cheer you. Is she in the room?
Yes, there.
Yes, oh, there she is. Yay, Rutendo! And her mom is acknowledging her as well. For all the heavy lifting and behind-the-scenes work, Rutendo, thank you. You've done such a fantastic job. And also our sponsor, Leap Africa, for their support. Thank you very much, Leap Africa. Last but certainly not least, to our audience, we're thrilled that you could join us today for this very, very important discussion. Stay safe, keep well, take care of yourselves and each other. And for those who are celebrating it, happy Mothering Sunday, as well as Eid Mubarak. Goodbye, and have a transformative conversation this afternoon.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.